Hello and welcome. Welcome to the first event of Visionary Women 2023. We are so happy to see everyone here in person finally. Thrilled to have you all. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lonnie Favre. I am the brand new board chair of Visionary Women. Thank you. It's a privilege and an honor to be up here with all of you. So thank you for coming today. I am so excited to kick off this year with this incredible panel that we have lined up tonight. But before we do that, I want to do a couple of quick things. I want to first thank our outgoing president, Nina Kodak. Nina, where are you? What an incredible job leading us through the pandemic. We are really indebted to you, Nina. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So now that we are finally post-pandemic, we're working very hard at Visionary Women to take us to the next level. And by that, we mean we want to grow our membership. We want to expand our collective giving impact. And we want to continue to deliver unique experiences for our members like what we're doing this evening. One of the most important ways that we're going to accomplish these goals is through what I'm very proud to announce, the hire of our first inaugural executive director, Ani Packard. Ani, please stand and wave at that group. This is a very exciting move for Visionary Women. Ani joins us most recently from LAUSD, where she was the Program Policy Development Advisor. She has her master's from Harvard in Policy and Education Management, and she has a proven track record in successfully aligning program objectives with business vision, growth, and scalability. I think she brings to us exactly what we need for Visionary Women, and we're very fortunate to have her. Ani will be speaking at the end of the panel and giving you some highlights on what's to come for the year. Please, by all means, after the event, introduce yourselves. She would love to meet everyone. So thanks and welcome. Okay, our goal at Visionary Women is to build community, to invest in high-impact causes, and to promote our own individual curiosity. So together at Visionary Women, we can make a far greater impact on the important issues that are facing women and girls around the world. We make a far greater impact together than we can do individually. And that's why we're all here, and that's why we're all embracing the Visionary Women spirit. This collective impact happens primarily through your meaningful membership contributions. So thank you to all who've contributed. And it also happens through the efforts of our amazing sponsors. Our sponsors are critical to our mission for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, by underwriting events like tonight, they help make your membership contributions go even farther to aid all the causes and initiatives that we work so hard to vet and to look at and to understand how we can make a difference in the world. And our sponsors are critical to that. A couple of things that we have invested in that you should all know. Indigo Africa, which is a global organization that works on the creation and growth of female-owned businesses in Africa. We've also worked with the Downtown Women's Center, which empowers women who are experiencing homelessness. And we've also had crisis response initiatives to the victims of the Ukrainian war and for the women in Afghanistan. So tonight, we are hosted by Bank of America, and we are very grateful, and I want to personally thank them. Not only for their support this year, but for the support that they offered us last year. Thank you very much. I'd like to bring to the stage tonight Radana Carpenter Woods, who is a business banking market executive for the LA Coastal region, and she is here to greet you.
Good evening and welcome. I made 2 promises to myself tonight. I would be brief, and I would be energized and inspired by all of the women in the room. And I am energized and inspired by all of you. So welcome. So Bank of America is thrilled to be the presenting sponsor for this dynamic, energizing Female Founders event. In 2022, we became the Visionary Women's inaugural annual sponsor as we saw the importance of empowering women through topical conversations and unique forums such as this to develop and to unite women across all industries and backgrounds. At Bank of America, we're proud to support women-led and women-owned businesses, such as the Dry Bar, I'm sure you're all familiar with, Porto's Bakery, who doesn't know about that, SpaceX, and many others. And we're pleased to support our women colleagues, our clients, and our communities through initiatives such as our Women's Entrepreneur Center, our Global Ambassadors Program, and our Capital Program through the Tory Burch Foundation. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to showcase women supporting women, and we look forward to this panel discussion. I want you to sit back, I want you to listen in, because we're about to have some fun. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Radonna. And thank you, Bank of America. So now let's get our incredible panel coming up to the stage tonight. We have an amazing group here with Candace Nelson, Alli Webb, and our evening moderator, Julia Boorstin. Julia will be introducing our speakers, but I want to give you a quick background on Julia. She is CNBC's senior media tech correspondent, has been an on-air reporter for the network since 2006. She plays a central role on CNBC's bicoastal tech-focused program Tech Check, delivering reporting analysis and CEO interviews with a focus on social media and the intersection of media and technology. In 2013, she created and launched the CNBC Disruptor 50, an annual list she oversees highlighting private companies transforming the economy and challenging companies challenging companies in established industries. She also helped launch the network's Closing the Gap initiative, covering the people and companies closing gender and diversity gaps. Very important. She's a graduate of Princeton, and she's been a reporter for Fortune magazine, as well as a contributor to CNN and to CNN Headline News. And I think one of the most important things, in October of 2022, her book was released, When Women Lead, What They Achieve, When They Succeed, and How We Can Learn from Them. Incredibly important. So welcome to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure these mics are on. Should I take this out? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. What a phenomenal room of women. It is such a thrill to be in the presence of so many visionary women. Thank you all. Thank you to our hosts and our sponsors. It is really great to see the way that Visionary Women convenes this community. And I have to say, I've been on book tour basically since September for my book. And I think there's a real hunger and demand for this kind of community right now among women across the country. And it's wonderful to see the way that they're connecting here. Before I talk a little bit about my book, I want to introduce our 2 fantastic panelists, Alli Webb and Candace Nelson, both innovators and serial entrepreneurs. And though they've worked in different fields, I really believe that you 2 really understand consumers and really understand female consumers and really created entirely new categories. Alli, dry bar, thank you very much. I don't think I could have gotten through my book tour without the ability to stop at a dry bar at 7 in the morning for various very important television segments. So I'm very grateful. But now I think it's really important to note you revolutionized this whole business of how women get ready for work or play or anything. And now you're working on all these other businesses, including Squeeze, which is a massage concept similar to Dry Bar. It is taking off. I can't wait to hear a little bit more. But also, if we don't all have humidifiers, we need to get them immediately, because Alli is working on a company called Canopy, which is the cutting edge, really, in sort of beauty and not just. Humidifiers are not just for babies anymore. So I'm very excited to get my humidifier. So Candace, as you may know, invented sprinkles cupcakes and revolutionized the world when she created the concept of a sprinkles ATM, which was brilliant on so many levels. I remember. But I think really deserves credit for the cupcake fad taking off, not just in the US, but around the world. Now she's scaling an even bigger concept, Pizzana. I have never had a cacio e pepe pizza until now. I don't know why no one has thought of this yet, but it's brilliant. So if you haven't been to Pizzana, there's one in Brentwood. It is amazing. So what I think is so amazing about these women is they've revolutionized these industries. They're serial entrepreneurs. They both sold businesses and did so without reliance on venture capital, which is how typically men scale and grow their businesses. And I think that sort of leads me to why I wrote my book. So my book, When Women Lead, was inspired by the fact that I'm a reporter for CNBC. I've been a business reporter for 22 years. I've interviewed thousands of men, thousands and thousands of male leaders, and many fewer female CEOs, just because there aren't as many of them. But the women I interviewed always stuck out. Particularly when I was interviewing female innovators for the Disruptor 50 list, I saw that these women were solving different problems. They were identifying different challenges that they could uniquely address, and they were doing so with very different management and leadership styles. And so that really inspired me, and I said, at first, I wanted to just tell these stories because I was meeting and interviewing these phenomenal women. I wanted to share that, and then the more women I interviewed, thanks to the magic of technology during the pandemic, I ended up interviewing about 120 women. And I profile a couple dozen of them in the book. The more women I interviewed, the more I saw they have these key commonalities that make them phenomenal leaders. Skills, strategies that men should be emulating, and all of us should be celebrating, since I see we're almost all women here, I believe. So I think it was really a wake-up call for me that there's a mass of data showing that some of the traits that we all have that we don't think of as powerful leadership traits are in fact leadership superpowers, and that people can succeed by really being authentic leaders and not trying to fit themselves into some archaic male leadership type. So that's why I wrote my book. It was really a thrill to write it. It's been fascinating to go around the country talking about it, and I'm so excited to talk to these two icons of female leadership about their journeys. And I want to start off with the founding story, because both of you came to your big idea from totally different industries. Now, Alli, I want to start with you. I know you had trained as a hairdresser, but you had started off in fashion. Tell us how you landed at this concept of a dry bar.
It's a really long story. But I just have to say, too, first of all, this is such an awesome room. Like, wow, it's such an honor to sit up here. And also, with Candace, like, I didn't know Candace when I started Dry Bar. But forever, I don't even know if I've ever told you that. We're good friends now, but I always use sprinkles as like we want to be like the sprinkles, like the branding, what she did with branding and like branding the cupcake. It was just so genius. And anyway, so it's super full circle and amazing for me to be sitting here with you.
Vice versa.
But how did it start? So yes, I was just like a pretty like lost soul out of high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And back then, I was just talking to somebody before, it's like there wasn't entrepreneurial programs in college. I didn't really know I wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents were entrepreneurs, but I don't know, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And like I said, long story short, I moved to New York City. I thought I wanted to work in fashion. I mean, I loved clothes, and I thought like that's something I'd probably be okay at. And but what I wasn't paying attention to was this like kind of theme in my life. Like I grew up in South Florida. I have naturally curly hair.
You do?
You know this.
Candace,
I must have forgotten.
Candace and I
So
both have
convincingly
naturally
straight.
Well, I had a blowout today. I mean, you know.
Imagine.
But, you know, it's so funny you don't know that.
But wait, but you know both Candace and I have curly hair.
Yes, I know that. I mean, I can spot curly hair like nobody's business, you know. But, you know, I grew up in South Florida. My hair was like a big curly mess. And by the way, you know, all these years later, I actually like my waves, not like it is now. But anyways, and I just, you know, I was like, I always struggled with my hair, but I always loved when I would get a haircut as a kid because they'd blow my hair out. And I was like, I wouldn't, you know, wash it for like 3 weeks because I loved it. And that was, you know, just as a kid, that was like who I was. And so but I wasn't paying attention to that. I moved to New York City instead of going to college, and that was like college for me. And I worked in fashion. I worked for Nicole Miller and Cynthia Raleigh, and you know, they were really big designers back then. And then I ended up opening a Nicole Miller boutique back in South Florida with my brother, who ultimately became my business partner at Dry Bar. And that just wasn't like it, you know, for me. And it was during that time where my brother and I actually almost killed each other that I was like, I think I'm going to go to beauty school. And I was like, I think I'm going to go to beauty school, you know. And I remember telling my brother, and he was like, you should totally do that. You're great with people. You've always loved hair. Like, that makes so much sense. And that really helped give me the confidence. Of course, when I told my parents, they were like, really? Beauty school? You know, and they were not as like, they had these little old lady clothing stores in South Florida, and next to them was like a little beauty parlor. And they're like, this is the dream, you know? And I'm like, no. I'm gonna move back to New York, and I'm gonna work in like fashion, and I'm gonna do, you know, like editorial work and whatever. And so I went to beauty school, totally fell in love with it. Like, walked in and was like, these are my people, this is where I was meant to be. And so I learned how to blow out my own hair because I was in beauty school. And I told you it was a long story. Sorry, I'm getting to it. Anyways, fast forward, you know, I worked in salons forever. I moved back to New York after working in fashion in New York. I moved back to New York to do hair, and I did that for a couple of years. I met my now ex-husband. Long story. I also have a book coming out in November that's going to tell you the whole story. Anyways, he worked in advertising. He's actually like the branding genius behind Dry Bar. We moved to LA, had 2 kids. Thought I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom after 5 years. And so that's kind of when I, like, you know, the itch to like do something for myself and not going back to a hair salon, you know, started to come up for me. And so I was like, I think I'm going to start like a mobile blowout business, because I could, like, you know, run around LA and blow out my mommy friend's hair. And by the way, now I live in West Hollywood, but at the time I was living in Santa Monica, and most of my clients were in Brentwood. I'm sure there's somebody in here that I did their hair in my mobile business. And there's a hand. I was basically going around town, like, blow drying all these women. And it was great because I was meeting women. I was able to talk to women, and I had, you know, for the last 5 years been talking to toddlers all day long. And so the idea of this mobile business was like perfect for me. But then I realized, you know, I was maybe onto something. I was only charging $40 to go to Women's Home, which, you know, was very, very cheap. But like, yeah, you're like, whoa. I know, you know, math isn't my strong subject. But anyways, what I realized, and what my instinct on that was, like, I didn't want it to be something that was cost prohibitive. I wanted to be able to go to women's house, like, while their babies were sleeping. I'd come in, do their, you know, blowout. It was all moms that I knew because I was in that mommy world. And then I realized, like, holy shit, there's nowhere for women to go for an affordable blowout in a nice space that's not like $150. You're not getting the pressure of a stylist wanting to cut and color your hair. And I was like, why doesn't this exist? You know, and it was like, it was such like a beautiful time, because I had all these women that I had started doing their hair, and they would tell their friends, and I was only $40, so I was very busy. And, you know, I was like, I think I'm going to turn this into, you know, a brick and mortar, what I'm doing here, into, you know, just a blowout place. And so I went to my brother and I said, I think I might be onto something. I think we should maybe open a store where instead of me going to them, they come to me. And, you know, he was like, why do women need a blowout, you know? And I was like, well, you remember my hair growing up? Anyways, so he got on board with it pretty quickly. Cameron, my ex-husband, was like, you know, it just was so impactful to me, because he was like, you get your nails done once a week, and I don't really notice, but when you get your hair blown out, it's like the first thing I notice. And he was always just such a skeptic. He worked in advertising. Everything's a bad idea when you work in advertising. And he loved it. My brother loved it. And so, we kind of locked arms and decided to do it.
That's awesome. By the way, that reaction you had, like, why do women care about this? That's why female founders draw 2% of all venture capital funding. Right. So that's another reason I wrote my book, is because I was seeing that these women had these great ideas, and then they would go pitch their ideas, and VCs would be like, is the wedding business really a big business?
I mean, we had that in the early days when we were, and I'll be quiet in a minute, but when we were first trying to raise money, we would go into these rooms with these men in suits. It was always men, and they were kind of looking at me like, what? Like, I think maybe my wife gets a blowout. Like, I don't really. Didn't even know. Didn't even know what it was, and they're like, well, can you sell makeup and can you do manicures and it was so funny to me, and I was like, you are the wrong partner. This is not the right person. But it was really interesting. And men, they're like, I kind of heard of this, but I don't know. I don't know if this will work. I'm like, it'll work. Yeah. Trust me, it worked.
Candace, tell us your founding story.
Well, I actually did not, my parents were not entrepreneurs, so I was not raised in an entrepreneurial household. My dad was a corporate lawyer, so everything was very risky to him. Very risky. And so I was raised to just, get a good education and, just sort of start on this corporate path. And so out of college, I was recruited into an investment bank. It was the late 90s, sort of the dot-com boom was going on. And I was working with tech companies, taking them public, and then jumped ship to go work for an early internet startup. And everything seemed to be going well. I was just like marching up that corporate path, and success was just right there. I could just touch it. I could just smell it. It was coming for me. And then life kind of, threw me a 1-2 punch. The first was the dot-com bust. The internet bubble burst, and I was out of a job. I was out of any prospects. I mean, there were so many people leaving the city of San Francisco that there was a 6-week wait for a U-Haul because everyone was leaving and no one was coming back. And then, so I was kind of planning my wedding during the time and sort of like pushed off, having to get another job, figured I'd probably go to business school. And so then 9/11 happened a few months later. And that was the biggie for me. That was when I had this personal epiphany. If it could all end tomorrow, what am I doing? And I realized that I did not like what I was doing. I didn't like crunching numbers. I wanted to do something that brought me joy. I wanted to do something that was at least a little bit meaningful in the world. And so instead of going to business school, I took a real sharp left turn and went to pastry school. And surprised all of my friends and my family, who I think were very worried, especially my lawyer dad, and went to this beautiful pastry school down the street from me in San Francisco called Tante Marie's, and I had that same reaction where I was like, baking had always been a hobby growing up, but it's very different to turn a hobby into your work. And so I really wanted to go to pastry school and test that interest. Would I like to do it, getting up every day and putting on the chef whites and getting my hands dirty? It's physical labor. It was the opposite of what I've been doing. And I loved it. I just fell in love with it. I loved how tactile it was. I loved creating something tangible that I could give someone and watch them enjoy. And so I knew I loved it, and it lit a fire in me, but I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Initially started making custom cakes out of my house because I wanted to be as creative as possible. And realized it was creatively fulfilling, but really a business dead end because there was nothing scalable about making personalized, custom cakes. And at the same time, I had noticed when I was planning my wedding that cupcakes were kind of new on the scene. They were sort of a trendy alternative to wedding cakes. But at the same time, I'd walk through the supermarket and I'd see all these generic cupcakes that were stacked in plastic clamshells in the grocery store. And they just were this commodity. And I had this aha moment, the cupcake needs a makeover. And I thought, here's this beloved American treat. We all grew up with it. So there was no education there. I already knew people loved it. But, it was forgotten. It was an afterthought made with shortening-laden frosting, waxy, sprinkles. And they were kind of icky. They were just like a kid's lunchbox treat. And I thought if I could elevate them and make them artisanal and make them giftable, then I could actually increase the market for these things. It wouldn't just be a kid's treat. People could start sending them as gifts. Adults would celebrate with them at, dinner parties and bridal showers and all the rest. So that was the idea behind Sprinkles. Ultimately moved from San Francisco because the economy was still pretty poor from the dot-com bust down to LA and just started delivering my cupcakes around town. The first orders were truly just friends who felt sorry for me. They were like, "You've done what?" They were like, "Okay, guys, Candace has lost it. Somebody order some cupcakes." And before I knew it, people were calling me, and I had no idea how they'd gotten my number. And then there was sort of a turning point when the producer for the Tyra Banks show, who is here tonight, called and said she wanted my cupcakes for Tyra's 30th birthday. And I was like, I've made it! I've made it. And so, but that really was sort of, I don't know, that gave me the confidence to start looking for a location. It was just the traction that I needed to go all in.
What's so amazing, and yes, I feel like we should pause for applause, but did not mean to interrupt the applause. What's so amazing about both of your stories is that you did all of that. You had this aha moment. This is an opportunity. This is a sort of new market I could create. And then you launched your first store, your first storefront. You had your first space. And then you didn't stop there, right? You were not small business owners. You became moguls in these new areas. And so I'm so curious how you went from that first, I know this is a good idea. Tyra Banks wants my cupcakes. I'm going to open a store. I know that I need a space. There's demand for this. I want this to be accessible, to really scaling to be a nationwide phenomenon. And I'm curious when that started to happen, and also when you realized, this could be really big. Do you want to start off?
What year did Sprinkles open the first one?
2005. How about you?
Oh, yeah, 2010. So, yeah,
Okay.
That would make sense why I was talking about you. Man, I did not know. We did not know at all. And it was never like, I don't know if it was like this for you, but it was never like, oh, we're going to take over the world one blowout at a time, which kind of became the tagline. But, it was like, let's just see if this first one works and like women come in. And, at the time it was like, I was hoping we would do like 40 blowouts a day, and we were doing like 100 a day. And, we were all very blown away, no pun intended. By the demand, and also instinctively I knew it, but we didn't know if it would totally work, and obviously that's a whole other conversation on why it worked and all of that. But very quickly we realized we were onto something, and our one little store in Brentwood, was the first one we had. It was 8 chairs, which would turn out to be smaller than any of the other ones because we didn't know anything at the time, and the demand was just through the roof. It was like, we were kind of like that hot club you couldn't get into, which isn't like so cool after a little while. I wanted to get everybody in. And, in the beginning, we just said like, walk-ins welcome. And then we were like, oh shit, walk-ins are not welcome. You have to book, because it was just so busy. And it was just it was such a crazy whirlwind. And because of that, we realized, okay, we've got to open another location. My brother, Michael, at the time, was my business partner. He had like a real estate marketing company, and I was like, you have to quit your other job and come do this. Like, this is like going to be a real thing. And it's funny talking about it now, but it was about 6 months from when we opened Brentwood to we opened Studio City, which is our second location. And it felt like a lifetime. And now it's like 6 months is nothing, but it felt like such a long time because we were just having to say no so much, and the demand was crazy. And so, it kind of just kept going like that. It was like demand was building. We were getting tons of press because we were this new concept. And, I had worked, in my previous life, I'd worked in between doing hair and whatever in PR. So I really understood the value of PR, and we were just like getting it in droves, and, it was so fun and exciting. And I knew, we knew that we were going to have to keep opening it, and we would get letters and emails. And this was like when Instagram was first taking off. So it was like Twitter. Women were like posting themselves on Twitter. Isn't that weird? Like pictures, but that's what it was. And then, Instagram was picking up, and it was just like demand was coming in from everywhere that we were like, wow, we really have to like get on this. And I didn't know how to do any of it. We didn't know how to scale. Michael started calling like some of his friends who've done this before. We would eventually, not long after that, bring in a woman who had run Pinkberry, who knew how to like scale a business, because we very quickly realized there was way more that we didn't know than we knew, and we needed to bring in like, frankly, people who were smarter than us and had experience at this. And the whole growing and scaling thing was like very overwhelming and daunting, and it was like, hold on, let's see if we can do this. And, we used to always say that, like, this is ours to mess up. And, it was like trying to open as many stores as we could without like losing the experience. And it was just like, it was such like a head spinning whirlwind. But, it was like, we knew we also had a lot of copycats on our tail, and we knew that we had to keep going if we were going to really try to be the leader in this space. So, we made a lot of mistakes. We did a lot of things wrong, but we did a lot of things right.
And do you think once you opened the second location, you realized that there was going to be demand for many of these locations?
I feel like I knew that in the first location because it was just so bananas. I mean, it was so busy, and I was like, women everywhere are going to want this. When we first opened Brentwood, it was $35, so it was really inexpensive. It was also like in the middle of a recession back then. It was 2010, and I felt like at this price point, at this experience, I can't imagine, women not wanting this. And so, but what was funny is that, or ironic, is that we opened Studio City and it really wasn't that busy at first. And I was like, oh, shit, and so we were like, I was like going to all like the school fairs and selling blowouts at a discount. Like, yeah, you were there. I mean, I was like, because when it's your baby and your business, you're like, I will do anything to make this succeed. So we were doing everything. We did like Groupons. Is Groupon still around? I mean, so we did that, and then it eventually picked up. And by the way, Studio City is probably one of the busiest stores now in the system. But the same thing happened. It's like, I haven't talked about this a lot, but like we opened West Hollywood. Also, crickets. We're like, where is everybody? This is supposed to work, And then we did the same thing. We just really hustled to get it moving. And, I point that out because as business owners and leaders, it's like you look at Dry Bar as like an overnight success, but it took a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of like building. And then we would start to open in, all these different markets, and it was doing really well. And then we'd get stumped. And ironically, when we went to San Francisco and more outer like San Francisco, and we weren't like, we had no customers, and it was like, why don't these women like us here? And it was like, it was just a different mentality. And there was like, we used to say it was like they were driving Priuses instead of Range Rovers, and they didn't care about blowouts, and I was like, what are they doing? And it was interesting trying to find our women, and our theory on it was like, if we can just get them in the door for one blowout and convince them that this will make them look better, feel better, and have more confidence, then it will become like a daily habit, which we eventually did, but it was hard. It was a battle.
What I've seen in interviewing thousands of people and hundreds of women for my book is that there's no such thing as an overnight success. And I actually think that myth is kind of dangerous. And I think it discourages a lot of people from taking risks, and specifically discourages a lot of women from starting things because we've been socialized to think we shouldn't fail. And failure is part of success. And I think that, you being very open and honest about these things is very important. And I just wish that this myth of the college dropout overnight success didn't exist, because I think it really particularly holds women back. Candace, tell us your aha moment. So you had the Tyra Banks aha that you should open the store, but then what made you realize that this was that you should be shipping them and it should be a nationwide thing?
Well, I thought it was an amazing idea, but I was really in the minority. I mean, there were a few reasons why everybody said it was a terrible idea. One was, hadn't been done before, and people say, if it hasn't been done before, there's probably a good reason why, because I was trying to, do the first ever cupcakes only bakery, and the first ever upscale cupcake. And people were used to spending 75 cents at Ralph's, but now here I was charging $3, and everybody wanted to know why. And I knew that people like cupcakes. I just wasn't sure they were going to pay that much for cupcakes, but I had seen what Howard Schultz had done for coffee, and truly, I wasn't charging any more than what a tall latte cost, and there was so much more going into it. It was so much more special. So I spent and not to mention, it was the height of the low-carb craze. Hello? Everybody was on a low-carb diet. They were all eating like burgers without the bun for dinner, eggs and bacon for breakfast, and I was like, moving to LA where everybody drinks green juice, aside from being on a low-carb diet, and I'm like, I'm opening a temple to carbs. So not a lot of people thought it would work, but I really felt strongly. I had a gut instinct that there was a need, and people would eat carbs if they were worth it, if they were craveable, if they were fresh, and if they were splurge worthy. And so I really believed that sprinkles could be a national brand. I thought that the concept could work in every big city across America, but I had to make sure. I had to make sure I wasn't the one crazy loon who believed it and no one else did. And so we opened in Beverly Hills in 2005. Aw, so nice.
We have the mayor of
Lily,
Beverly Hills with
Lily
us.
Bossy. The mayor. And we had that same crush that you did from the beginning. Like I was like, had, meticulously laid out all my cupcakes in the display case. I'd baked all night. I had sort of imagined that I could, bake 200 cupcakes to get us through the day. People would come in, buy 1 or 2 cupcakes at a time, and people were coming in and buying 2 dozen at a time. And we were sold out by noon, and people had driven across town. You know how it goes. Driven across town, found parking in Beverly Hills, so excited, told their kids they were going to come back with a dozen cupcakes from the new cupcake shop, and arrived, and the case was bare. And all I wanted was to inject a little joy into the world and bring people together and make people happy, and everyone was so pissed off at me. Everyone was mad. I remember there was this one woman who came in, and she was yelling at me and Charlotte. She was like, "You guys are incompetent. You will never make it. You're going to go out of business." And literally all I could do was agree with her. I was like, yes, we are totally incompetent. We have absolutely no idea what's going on. So luckily she was right on the first count, luckily not on the second. But obviously, we had to get our production in order. We had to, get our operations in check. We had to hire up and scale up before we could ever think about scaling our business. But the same thing, we had all of this sort of competition and imitation on our heels and sort of nipping at us. So on the one hand, I was being really precious with the product and had this sort of chokehold on the business because I thought nobody can make a cupcake like me. It'll never be the same. And so I was really scared to hand over the reins and hire a team and hand over my recipes to the bakers. But on the other hand, all of a sudden, our crazy idea had become somehow overnight a very natural one. And there were these copycat cupcake bakeries popping up everywhere. So we had to go and scale as quickly as we could while still maintaining the quality of the product.
Will you tell your Oprah story?
Of course. So that first year, I literally don't know how I survived. I, first of all, ate cupcakes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because I never left the bakery. And as I said, I was so scared to hire up. Charles and I, there were nights where we rolled up our aprons and we slept on the bakery floor. It was that brutal. Thought I was going to die. And so that first holiday season, we were the gift to give. Every, studio agent, every muckety muck in Hollywood, was delivering sprinkles to their holiday list. So we'd gotten through our first holiday, Christmas, Hanukkah season, and we'd survived. And we literally were like, thank God it's January. People are going to be on cleanses and we can get 6 hours of sleep. And sure enough, it was, midweek, and we were kind of cleaning up early, and we couldn't believe our luck, and the phone rings, and caller ID said Harpo Studios. And of course, Harpo had studios in Santa Monica, so I didn't think anything of it. I figured they were calling to place an order. And it was a producer on the other line, and she told me, Oprah loves your cupcakes. And I was like, oh my God, somebody prop me up. I'm going to die because I was the hugest Oprah fan and watched so much Oprah when I was unemployed after I lost my job. And she was my idol. So I was like, that's really incredible. Wow. And as my jaw was agape, she said, and she would love 350 of them. I'm like, great. Great. Tell us where they need to be. She's like, well, actually, Chicago by tomorrow morning. Can you do that? And I was like, yes, even though I had no idea how I was going to do that. And Charles was like, we had no money, but he was like, how are we going to do it? Because they wanted to put the cupcakes under the plane and send a courier. And all I could imagine was those cupcakes were just going to get smashed like pancakes. And my big break was going to be over. And he was calling to find out if we could charter a private plane and what we were going to do. And then finally he was like, screw it. And he booked a red eye and we stacked all these cupcakes up. We were holding the bags like this, because the boxes were towering over the bags. And we headed to the airport with nothing but the clothes on our back and all of those cupcakes that were just our precious bounty. And we were the most annoying people going through security because we were like, each box went through one by one. We were like worse than a family with like triplets going through security. And anytime anyone gave us any sort of issue, we were like, we're going to Oprah. And they were like, yeah! It was like high fives all around. And so we got there the next day before Oprah even got there. So I watched her walk in like pre-glam, and I was just like, I couldn't even breathe. She walks by, and then Mary J. Blige was the like guest singer. I was like, this day couldn't get any better. And so she comes out, and she's like all ready to go on stage, and she complimented me on my sweater. Never forget it. And she went out to the stage. They delivered all these cupcakes to the studio audience, and she sat there, and she basically delivered this love letter about sprinkles and how all the celebrities loved these cupcakes, and they were so yummy and so delicious. And Barbara Streisand sent them to her, and I just was like, I can't even handle this. And my husband and I were looking at each other, we're like, holy shit. And the producer on the way out was like very understated. She's like, you might just want, I don't know, just like be prepared for an uptick in business. And we were like, and so 2 weeks later when the show aired, it was like, forget it. I mean, we had calls coming in from around the world. I felt badly for all of our local customers because we were not the little secret anymore, and there were lines around the block, and it was just phenomenal. It was unbelievable.
I love that story. I love the Oprah story. I also have to say, and I should have mentioned, Candace wrote an amazing book called Sweet Success. I see that some of you have it.
Oh, yeah.
You haven't read it yet. I highly recommend it. It's a fabulous read. And I can't wait to read Alli's book when it comes out in November.
I think it's going to be juicy.
November.
Okay.
Pre-order as soon as possible.
I'm so jealous of that story. I'm
such
like
a good
dying to meet Oprah.
She's so awesome.
Oh, it's like that's the dream.
Me
And this
too. It's the dream.
Yes.
Well,
Amazing.
so I have so many questions. I really could interview both of you for hours, and I want to be sensitive to the fact that Candace has to get on an airplane in a little bit. So I'm going to. Okay. So I have so many questions. One question I want to get to before I get to your current businesses is this idea of being leaders and leadership style. You mentioned Howard Schultz. You said you had someone come in to complement your skill set. But women tend to lead very differently than men do. And I write about this in my book. Both of you have spoken with great humility and vulnerability, which is something that women tend to do more than men. Many of you may have noticed this in your work experiences. And I'm really curious how you see your leadership style now and how it's evolved over time. Because now you're both involved in different businesses, which hopefully we'll have time to touch on. But what kind of a leader are you? And what would your advice be to some of the women in here who are leading in different capacities?
Well, I think, I was so like thrust into leadership in Dry Bar, and I was never technically the CEO. I didn't really want to be. I really thought my brother was better suited for it. And not because I couldn't do it, but like I wanted to be in the stores, in the field. I wanted to be training the hair. I wanted to be the stylist, and I wanted to be like talking to the clients. And of course I could have been CEO in that regard, but it just wasn't honestly very appealing to me. But I was certainly leading the company, But I think it was a combination of things that watching my parents and how they had a really small little business, but they had this like way about them, this like leading by example. It was like my parents, there was nothing like, no job that was too small for my parents. So I grew up with that mentality of like watching my parents sweep the floor and doing like clean the bathroom and do whatever needs to be done. And I think that was just ingrained in me. So I think as a leader, I'll start with the good stuff. As a leader, I was like, I'm going to be in the trenches with you guys. Like, I'm not putting myself up here and you down here. I wanted to be very like in the team, in it with them. And I was, but I also like, but then as I grew and as the company grew, I was a little bit conflict avoidant. I didn't want to have tough conversations sometimes. And sometimes I would make my brother have them. And, it was like, I think I was like immature as a leader where I would like sulk and pout and get mad at people and wouldn't talk about things, and I think as I grew as a leader, as I developed as a person, I realized like you can't be like that, and you have to like be much more open. And ironically, my current husband happens to be, he coaches founders and CEOs. It's kind of funny. You can imagine what our house is like. But I really have learned so much from him. And I remember when, I don't know if you ever had a coach, but I remember like a lot of my friends who are CEOs, they were talking years ago about getting a coach, and I was like, why do you need a coach? This is silly, and I was like, that's not like, I don't want a coach. I don't need a coach. And now I've come to realize, like, through a lot of the work he does, a lot of the learning I did, like I really botched a lot of relationships within my company because I didn't know how to deal with it. It was like I didn't have any experience. I didn't know, and in the handful of companies that I worked for, I wasn't like, they weren't shining examples either. So it would take like getting to know, watch other leaders, friends, and other people how they were leading, and start to like pay attention to it more, and start to like see my blind spot and what I wasn't doing well. And my brother, it's like when you work with family, and I'm sure you experience this with your husband, it's like you work with your family. At least my brother is a little bit afraid of me, and it was like, and I remember him telling me once, he was like, people
Is he
are
older or younger?
He's older. And he was like, people are scared of you. And I was like, what? Why? Like such a bitch. And he was like, because you're such a bitch sometimes. And I was like, oh shit, I don't want to be a bitch, but I didn't even realize it. It's like I was just so focused on the business, and I was so like, everything has to be perfect, and I want everything to be just so. And I would walk into shops and I would lose my mind if there was dirt on the floor, if the music wasn't right, if the people didn't greet people the way I wanted them to. Like, it was like a sensory overload for me when I would walk into a shop, and I would tell everybody, And I also like learned once we brought in like a professional CEO, and he was really amazing. And it was like I learned how to like pull back, go in, like be warm and friendly to people, and then have a meeting and talk about or write everything down that I had seen, and better assess what was going on. Because when I would come in as the founder, and I'm sure you experience this too, Candace, like people are excited to say hello, and they want to talk about the business, and clients want to talk, and the stylists want to talk, and like I'm like a bitch on wheels about all the things that aren't going. And I would like I'd go get towels, and I'd start cleaning, and everybody was like, oh my God, what is she doing? But I was just like, I didn't really care. I was so focused on the experience. But I learned eventually how to temper that and how to like find a balance, and I didn't know, and it would take years to get to that point. And again, it was, bringing in other people who had some experience with, and it not being my brother, who was like, hey, here's what I'm noticing, and here's, some things that you can do better. And ultimately, I think I'm a much better leader now than I was then.
But I think what's so interesting, and I write about this a lot in my book, is this idea that there are two sides of that trait. Like that passion and that willingness to be a communal leader and work as part of a team is a great asset, but it also can have its negative impacts. But that kind of growth mindset of like, I'm going to keep the thing that's good, and I'm going to try to improve this other piece. I think that's how women succeed, and not being like, I know what I'm doing, don't tell me what to do, and being open to that feedback because you want it to get better. So I think that's really important. So Candace, tell us about your evolution.
Well, I relate to so much of that because I do think that management is something that you have to learn. And if you are learning everything as we did on the job as a young founder, how do you learn that? My husband is my co-founder, and he is I have to say, he's a talented manager of people. He can deliver the worst news, and people will be laughing and leaving, and they're like, wait, what, was I just fired? Like, what? And I don't have that same nuance. I think it's because he's from Oklahoma, so everything just sounds real charming when he talks. But I will say, I like to hire tough and manage loosely. I think that comes from the fact that I'm a real self-starter, and coming from investment banking, everybody else was a self-starter as well. And so I'm much more laissez-faire in terms of, well, not laissez-faire in the interviewing process. I really am a great interviewer. Just gonna pat myself on the back there. My husband and I used to interview together, and he was the worst. Literally, he would sit there and talk about himself and the business, and the person would be like, through the whole thing, they'd say thank you and goodbye, and he'd turn to me and go, they were great. And I was like, he didn't say a damn word. So I booted him from the interview. I took that on and left the managing to him. And what I do is just let people talk and get them to relax. And what that does is helps me understand who they are and to make sure that it's a mutual fit, make sure that our values are aligned, help me understand their motivations. It's not like I'm looking for some gotcha moment, but if they happen to tell me, they were fired from their last job, that might be interesting information for me to know. No, so I think I look at it as hiring the right people gets you so much further than right off the get-go. And then I'm more or less fair in my management style, but definitely not autocratic at all. Definitely like buy-in from my entire team. I look to them for ideas. And actually in my business now, I have a lot of Pizzana. I have a lot of Gen Z employees. So I am constantly trying to learn from them because there's a real generation gap there. And I don't want to be generation tone deaf. I mean, I really am trying to learn from them all the time.
I really could keep going for an hour. I'm getting signals that I cannot keep asking you about your amazing businesses. So I apologize because I know you have to get to the airport. But Pizzana, I want you to all check it out. And I also Canopy, Squeeze, Beckett & Quill, which is an amazing jewelry company. I'm not wearing any of the jewelry right now. But the businesses you've created are so iconic and disruptive and different and creative. And I also think your growth mindset is really such an inspiration. I have to say, just since you both mentioned it, the commentary that you were judged very harshly when you gave negative feedback and how you let your husband do the feedback. Women are actually judged more harshly than men if they give the exact same feedback. And there is some data about that in my book. So maybe you were picking up on the fact that there was some frustration there. But I think you're both awesome. This room is awesome. I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm so sorry we can't keep going. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, visionary women. Thank you, Alli.
Well, we are going to take a few questions from the audience.
Well,
Well,
yes,
we
we have
do
time for
have
audience
these ladies
questions.
up
Good,
here.
good.
So I'm just going to kind of roam around the room. I see a hand up back there.
Ask about their new businesses, please.
I'm going to hold the mic, but if you can just...
I just want to know how many dry bars do you have all over LA and how many sprinkles you have all over LA or anywhere else?
I don't know how many we have in LA. I think there's like 25 maybe, but there's 150 across the country. Yeah.
Hi.
In LA or sorry, in California or nationally? Oh, I think Sprinkles now has like 40 locations and actually is now starting to franchise internationally as well as domestically, if you know anyone who's interested. And then Pizzana has 3 in LA, soon to be 5, and then soon to be 3 in Texas.
And I'll just point out that they both sold these companies, Dry Bar and Sprinkles, and which is also rare for female founders. But women do tend to sell their companies a year earlier than their male counterparts on average.
You're a wealth of knowledge over there.
We have another question.
Know
Yeah,
that?
so my question is, this is for Alli. You mentioned when you first started the business, you had young kids, I think. How did you manage that balance of having young kids and starting a brand new business?
Not well. It's funny. Actually, one of the chapters in my book is called "Balance is Bullshit," because it really was. I mean, not to be discouraging, but I do feel like it. On some days, I got it. Really, it worked, and luckily I had my mom who was around to help with my kids, and I think that really was a big piece of it for me. Not that I also had nannies and stuff too, and I really I had a lot of inner conflict about it because I wanted to be home with my kids, but I also wanted to be doing this business that made me so happy, and I kind of I think I reconciled it by and I would talk to my kids about this. At the time, they were 3 and 5, and now they're 16 and 18. Oh my God. My son just got into college. It's crazy. But, I think even from the time they were very young, and I think because my parents had their own business, I would talk to them about, I love you guys and I love being with you, but I also have things that are important to me. And if I'm a happy mom, I'm going to be a better mom, and if I'm doing things that I like. And so, and as my kids grew and started to understand more, I mean, my older son used to say to me, why do you have to open so many dry bars in other, states? Why can't you just open them all here? Because he didn't like me traveling, and it's a whole other long story. But I would talk to my kids a lot about tell me what's important to you that I'm there for. And it was interesting because you ask kids questions, they tell you like, oh, this thing I don't really care about, but this thing I really want you to be there, mommy, you know? And so I was like, okay, I will move everything around to be there for that. He said this thing is important, you know, and my kids, I think, grew up with this, like, even now I say to my son, like, I'm so proud of you. And he says, I'm so proud of you. Like, they grew up with this, like, watching their mom work really hard for, like, what we have, you know? And I think that that was what I saw in my parents, and that's what I really have tried to emulate for my kids. But I made the joke in the beginning because it's not perfect, and it's hard, and you're gonna, like, I mean, I learned this, and I'm sure you agree with this. It's like some days you're like, it all lines up, and you get to the thing, and you did the other thing, and then some days you're like, I missed the thing, I screwed this up, and you know, and it's like, it just depends on the day. And I think you just, as women, I think we can't beat ourselves up for it. It's like, you know what, tomorrow's a new day, and I'll make it right, you know?
Can't have it all at the same time.
You can't have it all. You just can't.
So you guys are super inspiring. Thank you very much for being here today. Hi. Here. So I have a question. It sounds all very successful and great, but there probably was a moment where you were like, screw it, I'm now going to stop. So it's a question for the both of you, but I'll start with you, Candace. So where was then the turning point that you were like, okay, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go. I have a business myself and 7 years, and I'm super happy. But there are moments that you're like, what is the ship doing? And where are you going? So I'm just curious to hear from you guys how you continue.
So just to clarify, moments where it just got really hard and I thought about throwing in the towel?
Yeah, and then kind of why you then decided to continue. I mean, I get that you saw your vision, but then sometimes, I mean, if that's it, that's amazing.
Why didn't you ever give up when the going got tough?
I had a vision. I had a vision for where I was going, and there was really no option. I mean, I think the closest I got to giving up was actually before we opened our first location, because it was a really tight real estate market. It was taking us forever. No landlord wanted to rent to us. Everybody was telling us it was a terrible idea. We had this little bit of money that just was dwindling as, you know, we kept looking. And I just thought, well, maybe this is a sign, you know, when you're just thinking like, is this a sign or is that a sign? Like, should I listen to my gut or is that a sign? I don't know. What is the universe telling me? But I think ultimately, I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do it. And I knew that the regret I would feel in not pursuing it would be worse than any sort of failure that I could possibly have. I could stomach the failure. I couldn't stomach the regret.
I mean, I would, you know, I think for me, there were a lot of moments. I don't know where you went. Hi. There were a lot of moments where I was like, it's just so much. And there's too many stories to tell where, you know, I had a lot of that, a lot of naysayers in the beginning. I also couldn't get a lease because they were like, what's a dry bar? But, you know, my best advice, you know, to you and the advice I give to myself in a lot of my other businesses too, is that like, try to just enjoy where you're at, you know, like, not to be so cliche, but like enjoy, you know, the journey, the process, because, you know, I could never have imagined we were going to build Dry Bar to what we did. I could, none of it. I, unlike you, really didn't have a big vision for it. Like, I was very in it, and if it grew, it grew. If it didn't grow, I really loved what I was doing. I loved the impact we were making on women. I loved that we were providing jobs. You know, and to me, it always felt like this big fat bonus that like it took off and that we made money and that, you know, it became this big thing and we started a product line, all that stuff. But like, that wasn't the vision for me in the beginning. You know, the vision was like, get this one store open and let like hope for the best, and I'll have like a little salary that comes in, you know? And so I think it's just like important to not lose sight of like what you're doing, you know, in order to like get to where you're going. I think, you know, it's a balance and you want to have some goals, but, you know, to really enjoy the journey and the process, I feel like is how I think about it now.
Thank you. And we have one more question from the Honorable Lily Balsi.
Just Lily, thank you. First of all, this is truly remarkable and so exciting to start off the new year with everybody back together again. It's really, I'm speechless. And I have to say that looking around the room and looking at all these faces and the energy that you feel here is remarkable. You three are so inspiring. And I have to start with that. And I have to say that everything that I've heard that you say, I think all of us can find a nugget that really resonated with us? A story, something that you shared, the authenticness that you all shared. I do have a question actually for Julia. You wrote the book about when women lead, and you interviewed thousands of women. I'm curious, and especially as we are standing here and seeing these remarkable women, what common thread, if there is one, that you see among women leaders? I would love to know, so we can try and find that within ourselves as well.
Well, thank you so much. There are so many of them, and I think the key thing is really breaking free from the stereotype that a leader is a white man. And I think that's dominated certainly the narrative in the business world where I've worked ever since 2000 when I graduated college. So there are a lot of different ones, but to me what I really think it is a combination of humility and confidence, and this idea I mentioned sort of like a growth mindset, but this idea that if you have the humility to acknowledge what you don't know and the confidence to know you can learn, that combination is a growth mindset and can really enable you to do anything. And that's what I heard you talking about when you were like, I wasn't good at this thing, so I figured out how to get better at it. And I think that's really essential. And I think women have to be really adaptable, and women leaders actually rank higher in adaptability. And I think that's because of that. And the other thing is, I think because neither of you and women in general don't fit that stereotype of what leadership has traditionally looked like. In many ways, they feel liberated to approach problems differently, to create new solutions, and also to lead in their own way that's authentic to them. And I sort of hope we can all break free from those archetypes and stereotypes and find our own skills that can be developed into superpowers, and not to feel like we have to be held back by the way things have always been done forever. Because if we sort of followed the old rules of business or anything, there wouldn't be a dry bar and there wouldn't be a sprinkles. And I think that it's really about identifying new opportunities and doing things in new ways.
Excellent, thank you. I think that concludes the Q&A portion. I'm going to welcome Ani up to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Candace, Alli, and Julia, for that incredibly fun and candid conversation. I have a few closing remarks, but before I jump in, I'm going to ask Candace a special thank you to you. You've got a speaking engagement first thing in the morning in Phoenix, so we want to make sure she gets to LAX on time. So Visionary Women has an incredible spring lineup that we'd like to share with you this evening today. We have impactful giving opportunities to organizations making a real difference for women and girls locally and globally. We also have some incredible events lined up, and I'd like to highlight just a few of them this evening tonight. The first event I'd like to highlight is our International Women's Day, which is going to be held on March 6th at the Waldorf Astoria. We're thrilled to announce our honorees this year will be Maria Shriver and her two daughters, Catherine Schwarzenegger Pratt and Christina Schwarzenegger. This will be the first time that Maria will take the stage with her daughters, and they're going to be taking a deep dive into their family's legacy of philanthropy and impact and really kind of grassroots giving across all the major domains where they've made a huge impact. Maria, Catherine, and Christina represent the beauty of the special mother-daughter bond and something that we're very excited to celebrate at Visionary Women as our 2023 honorees. Additionally, Visionary Women is hosting its first excursion, and we'd like to invite you to Napa for an adventure. A 2-night, 3-day adventure, and you're going to experience Napa in a way you certainly never have before. We're going to be exploring Napa through the lens of women that have put Napa truly on the map. The trip will accommodate 32 participants, and it will be available first for the leadership level Visionary Women community members. A few highlights include private access to 3 world-class private art collections, exquisite culinary experiences, and conversations with Napa Valley's trailblazers in the vintners and entrepreneurs, including Ann Colgan, Suzanne Booth, Samantha Rudd, and April Gargiula.
Finally, we're enthusiastic beyond measure to have all of you here this evening. I've had the opportunity to meet some of you, and I look forward to meeting many of you at the conclusion of tonight's event. Many of you have been with us for many years at the inception of Visionary Women. For some of you, this is your first evening with us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you'd like to learn more about how to formally join our community here at Visionary Women, I encourage you to reach out to one of our incredibly talented and hardworking board members. Board members, could you give a wave so folks can know who you are? Please look to these women for any questions you may have about Visionary Women and the events and our impact and our givings that we have planned for the year ahead. Additionally, the check-in table out in the front is now our membership table, and our wonderful, dedicated Gen V volunteers can help you kind of register today and join our community. So with that, this is kind of the formal conclusion of our kickoff 2023 event with Visionary Women. Hang back, enjoy, have a drink, nibble on some more snacks, and thank you again.